Hold up.
You're at the park?
I'm at the park.
It looks cold.
It is.
Your girls are doing online school?
Yes.
Oh,
And so
cool.
they're in front of me laying on some blankets, actually covered in a blanket, and doing their schoolwork.
That's pretty awesome, actually.
Yeah, we've really been liking online school because they get to sort of self-pace and do what they want. And the way they're doing it, they don't have to have any meetings with their teachers really.
Oh, okay.
So they can do it whenever they want. And we can do these kind of things.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It's nice.
Yeah. All right. So tell us your credentials and how you ended up being a pediatrician.
Okay. So I'm a pediatrician. I have an MD. I'm a fellow of the American Academy of Pediatrics, which means I'm board certified in pediatrics. When I was younger, I wanted to be a lawyer. And then I wanted to be a child psychologist. And then I did my undergrad degree in psychology at Arizona State University. I sort of felt like psychology was a little bit too gray. I took an anatomy and physiology class and enjoyed like this is the way the human body is made and this is the way it works. And when this happens, it doesn't work. And this is what we do. And kind of liked that better. I felt like more answers. Maybe I could do a little bit more than maybe with psychology. Mm-hmm. So I decided to go into medical school. I was actually living with one of my good friends, who I'm still good friends with. He was pre-med, and she changed her mind, decided not to do pre-med, but I decided to do pre-med. So she's the one that kind of talked me into the anatomy and physiology.
And you always knew you would do pediatrics?
I did. I've always wanted to work with kids. I kind of had a rough childhood, and so I always wanted to help kids out and maybe help them to make it through a little bit easier than I did. So that's kind of always been my goal. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. And so I actually watched a video today, YouTube video, and it was a doctor and a lawyer having a discussion, and it was which is harder, law school or medical school. Oh. And it was like a more fun kind of interview. It wasn't like they were like really battling it out, but it was interesting to see the things that they said were difficult about both of them and how they're like so different.
Yes. Yeah, I've recently been through some stuff, and I just had to do some like contracting stuff recently, and I just find that law is not very black and white like you might think it is. Seems very gray. Like everybody can interpret it however they want. And so that's frustrating. And then I was like, yep, I could never be an attorney. Right. So I'm definitely glad I did not choose law and I chose medicine. Yeah.
It's a different mindset for sure.
It is. Yeah. Just you have to deal with not so nice things,
Right. Well, and that's funny that you say that because in the video, the lawyer actually said that about law school. He's like, you don't learn how to be a lawyer in law school. You learn about all these different theories. Whereas in medical school, it's exactly that. Like this is this and this is that, and that's how you do it.
Yeah.
And so that just sounds complicated. But med school is incredibly long.
Yes. I mean, 4 years, isn't that what law school is?
Oh, I guess it's not that much longer. He said it was 3 years.
Oh, okay. So medical school.
It took 10 years to be a doctor.
Okay, well, because you have to get your bachelor's degree. So that's 4 years, right? Then you have to go to medical school, which is 4 years. And then you have to do a residency. So you will be a doctor after medical school. You'll be a medical doctor, but you won't be able to get board certified. You won't be a specialist. You just won't be board certified. So you could practice, but it might be difficult. It would probably be very difficult. So pediatric residency is 3 years. And then, different residencies are different lengths. So that's why. So it took me 11 years after high school to just get out and start working in the real world.
Wow. That's wild.
It's a lot.
It is.
Yeah.
And very stressful, I hear.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
So speaking of, I feel like being a pediatrician is like one of the more difficult routes to go. And it's almost like similar in some ways to being like a vet because you're listening to the parent mostly saying, I think my child feels this, and the
Right.
kids can't really, well, the younger kids can't really tell you like this hurts or this is, I feel this. Is
Right.
that super challenging?
It can be challenging, but oftentimes the parents give a really good history, and I find parents to
Okay.
be really intuitive, so
Mm-hmm.
I tend to trust parents' interpretation of what's going on, especially as I get to know them more, and then
Yeah.
I get to know which parents are like really right on. This is what's happening. Which parents might exaggerate, which parents might worry a little bit more. Um, and then I can get a feel for, yeah, I think, that's probably what's happening. And then you just follow the history, and the history gives you a ton. You add in some of your physical exam, and if you have to, some of the labs. Typically, I find that it's okay.
I feel like I'm in the middle of that. I'm like kind of exaggerating because I'm a worrywart, but I also feel like I'm pretty in tune with my kids and I have a pretty good idea of of what's going on,
Uh-huh.
so I can relay that to you.
Yeah. So you're having me on, and everyone knows I'm a pediatrician, but HIPAA laws say that I'm not allowed to say anything about you or your children, or that they're even
Oh,
my
okay.
patients. I'm not going to say anything unless you give me permission, because
I give you permission.
okay, I mean, you asked me the question, but I just was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's kind of a weird spot. So yeah, I mean, I think you have a really good sense of what's going on with your children. I do recognize the anxiety in you, but I also appreciate that once you've told me the story and I ask you questions and then I explain to you what's going on, that you trust me, that you're like, okay, yeah, I'm really was worried about this, but now that you say this, okay, I got it. We're in a good spot. So I
Good,
appreciate
good.
that about.
So one thing that I feel we should mention is we worked together. I used to
Mhm.
work at the front office of where you were
Uh-huh.
working at the
Correct.
time. This is a funny story, and I don't think you remember it because on that Facebook post that I posted where I said, what do you remember of me when we worked
Uh-huh.
together? And you're just like, oh, I just remember you were up front. So when
Yeah.
I first started taking the kids to see the providers there, I was a little nervous to see you because I didn't think you cared for me because I really upset you one time.
Oh.
And I can tell by your reaction, like you have no memory of this, but it sat with me
Oh no.
because I did do something wrong.
Oh.
So,
Well.
okay, busy mornings, we're answering the phone. At the time, we had one of the three of us was not really holding our weight. So
Uh-huh.
I was trying to answer and answer and answer. And there's so many times when you're working scheduling and you answer the phone and you have to say politely, can you please hold? But it's
Right.
rhetorical, like
Right.
you need to hold.
Right. It's
And
gonna happen.
sometimes, right. And sometimes parents will be like, well, no, my child has a really bad sore throat. And it's like, well,
Mm.
get in line. Like I
Right.
can't put you at the front of the line for that.
Right.
And so one time I was very stressed out. I'm answering the phone. I say, can you please hold? And the person on the other line says no. And I say, I'm going to need you to hold. And I push hold. The phone rings again and it's you. And you were like, do not
Oh.
put me on hold. And I was like, it's one of the providers. Because that's like,
Oh
your
my
job
gosh.
is not only to please the patients and the parents, but also the providers.
Right.
So, like, that's one of your concerns is if you upset a provider. And I just remember that day
Oh
stuck
my
with me because I was
gosh.
like, oh, what did I do?
Oh
And you
my
needed
gosh.
to speak
So
to one of the doctors.
right. So I do remember that now that you say that. And so, looking back, I should have said, this is Dr. Horner. Can I please talk to so and so? Like quickly, instead of being like, no. Because then you're like, what?
I know, but then I
But
felt like, oh my gosh, like that was rude of me to be like, I'm
oh,
going to need you to hold.
oh my gosh. And then did I ever talk to you about it afterwards?
No, we kind of just brushed it away. And then, I mean, you never treated me like poorly or anything, but it's just
Yeah.
that story
Okay.
stuck with me. And then when I started taking my kids there, I had like, I felt like, is this going to be awkward?
Mm-hmm.
And then what actually made me like switch and primarily start seeing you was when the boys were going to get circumcised.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned that you noticed something that could be a potential complication in a circumcision.
Right.
And then the other provider that I had seen, when I mentioned it to her, she goes, "Oh, theirs are so minor, I wouldn't have mentioned it." And I was like, "What?" Like, no, like I'm the type of mom that needs to know everything. If there's like
Right.
a 0.0001% chance that that could happen, like I need you to tell me. And so
Right.
that's when I was like, oh, like my personality really lines up with how Dr. Horner practices. And I think
Nice.
that's the goal, you know, when you're
Right.
searching for a pediatrician. I don't think it's like offensive to you guys if it's like, oh, like we're just not lining up. Like you
Right.
want that parent to feel like they have the right provider.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so my, kind of one of my philosophies is that I want to be an educator for parents, and I want to tell them what I see and what I'm thinking and the different, options that we have. And I want the parents to help me make the decision, because ultimately it's their child and their life and it's not mine. And so, yeah, I tend to do that. Like, hey, I see this and it might not be an issue, but I just want you to know. And that way you're aware of this could happen or that could happen. And then we can talk about it. That's funny. Going back, I will say, I've had people definitely tell me, because my personality is me, right? I mean, that's who I am. I do tend to sometimes just be abrupt or blunt. I just say what I'm thinking. And so if you're talking to me, you know what I'm thinking, but sometimes that's hard for people and they feel kind of uncomfortable. So, I've worked on that over the years, and I've gotten better, I think, at going back and being like, hey, I'm sorry. I hope you didn't feel uncomfortable. That's okay. Like, try to make sure that if someone says no, you ask them, well, is there something going on? Why can't you hold? And then, I would have done that maybe later in my career, because I mean, how long ago was it that you worked with me? I think,
Goodness.
right, it was a while. So
2010. So we're looking at almost, 10 years, 11 years.
Okay. Yeah. So hopefully I've grown since then, right? That's my goal, is to keep growing. So.
And so when I worked with you, how far into your career were you?
Well, gosh, if that was 10 years ago, a year or two, because I've been practicing for 12 years now.
Okay.
So I was pretty new out of residency at that point. Yeah.
Oh, very cool.
And that also might be part of why I didn't come back and talk to you, because I wasn't a partner, right? So I was new there. So I was also like kind of finding my way.
That would have been my third medical job, I think.
Okay.
So, I mean, and I was young. I was 22.
Okay.
And I'll be honest, I was not a good employee there. Like, I have come a long way in life now.
Yeah.
Now that I've gotten some life experience. I love medicine. Like, if I were more, I don't want to say intelligent, I don't want to be self-deprecating, but if I felt like I could go further as far as maybe like an RN or something, I would have, because I love medicine, I love science, and my understanding of it isn't that extensive, but what I do know, and I think that's what I do appreciate about you, the way that you explain things is the facts in a very articulate way, but not too big for a parent like me to understand.
Nice.
Whereas
Appreciate that.
I don't want to say other doctors dumb it down, but sometimes it's like,
sometimes.
I want the big stuff,
Right.
So,
right. Yeah, I want the details. I don't just want you to tell me this is what your child has and this is what we're going to do. Like, that's not my style either, right? When I go to a specialist, I don't want them to assume that because I'm a doctor, I know everything, or not tell me anything because they don't want me to worry. I'm like, no, I want you to tell me, this is what I see. This is what it is. This is, like this. And I ask a ton of questions too. Like, what could it be? What should we do? Okay. And what are other options? And then what if this? And then, and they'll be like, oh,
oh, you want me to go that deep? Okay.
Yes.
Do you suggest people always take their kids to a pediatrician versus a family doctor? So I guess I didn't realize that people took their kids to a family doctor until I was older, because my mom always took me to a pediatrician, and I worked in pediatrics. And I think people don't realize that it is a specialty.
Right.
And I just feel like, not that a family doctor is incapable of taking care of kids, but I like that pediatricians, they see everything kid all day, every day. And part of how, I would assume, correct me if I'm wrong, part of where your knowledge comes from is experience. So you have your teachings and, you know, your medical journals and all that, but then you see stuff and then
Right.
you can recognize it more easily than maybe a family doctor might.
Definitely. So definitely you see, you know what strep does, but sometimes you see a weird presentation and then that sticks with you. And another time you might be like, oh yeah, you know what? I saw that kind of crazy rash one time with a patient. And maybe it's not the classic strep rash, but it's still a rash. And then you strep them and they're positive. And you're like, oh yeah, or, I have stories of kids that go to like a regular urgent care, not a pediatric urgent care. And they come and they tell me the same story and I totally know what it is. And they're like, oh yeah, the urgent care doctor said blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no, that's not it.
Right.
So you're right. You definitely get more experience the more children you see and the more you deal with pediatric issues. I don't go as far as saying like kids should never see a family practice doc or internal medicine doc should never see kids.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like if the child is very complicated, has, something like Down syndrome or fetal alcohol syndrome or autism or any of the long-term, chronic health diseases in children, they definitely should see a pediatrician. I think they'll benefit significantly from that. I think most children benefit significantly from seeing a pediatrician, but I think, there are definitely family practice docs that are very good. And, when I was a kid, I saw my dad's internal medicine doc as a teenager. Before that, I don't even think I went to the doctor.
Oh, wow. The old office that I used to take my kids to, that you used to work at, I called one time and it was under new management. There was a new office manager and she was taking calls because the call flow was so big. Mm-hmm. And I told her that I thought my son had thrush. And she goes, what is that, like some kind of a rash? And I was like, oh, you work in pediatrics and you think thrush is a rash? I was like, not exactly. It's like fungus on the tongue, right? Yeah. And she's like, oh, so like a rash in the mouth? I was like, sure. He has a rash in his mouth. And I was just like, how are you here right now? It was such an odd experience.
Yes. You're like, just please make me an appointment. Whatever you put down, whatever. We'll figure it out.
Whatever you want.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah. So I have quite a question about the flu shot because and some people might criticize me for this, but honestly, like one of the reasons that I vaccinate isn't because of my own research, but more because I have come from a background of working in pediatrics. Mm-hmm. I trust the providers that I've worked with. I have scheduled their children for the flu vaccine.
Right.
So I'm like, if they're giving it to their kid, like, heck yeah, I trust it, you know?
Right.
But one thing that people always have to say in response to the flu vaccine is they're like, what's the point? Because it's just, they guess a couple strains and it's never the right one. So the flu still happens. Right. So I guess my question is, does it, if it's not one of the flus that goes around that's in the vaccine, does it still protect you from that other flu, even though it wasn't part of the vaccine?
So it gives you some cross reactivity, so like some cross immunity. So the more your body has been exposed to that type of virus and all the different particles in it, then the more quickly it can make an antibody and a response to a mutated virus. So, I've had the flu vaccine every year for 20 years, right? So I don't get the flu. Like I rarely get the flu. And I can only remember one time I've ever had the flu. And so I just find that the more you kind of vaccinate and boost your immunity, the more quickly your body can respond. And maybe it's not very effective every year at stopping all strains of the flu, but at least it stops some of them, right? So it can't spread ridiculously. And it's just better than nothing, right? It's like, do you want to do a flu pandemic? Do you want to see a flu pandemic? Because I really don't. I'm not enjoying this pandemic.
Right.
So,
well, I think that the thing that people are having trouble with in this pandemic is they do look at the flu and they think, oh, well, the flu shot doesn't always work. People get sick and they survive. So what's the problem? And so when people say like COVID-19 is just like the flu, I'm like, maybe back in 1918, like when we didn't have a vaccine, when we didn't have any treatments for it, like maybe that version of the flu, but the one that we have today, I think that the reason we have anti-vaxxers and the reason that we have so many people not able to wrap their head around the dangers of this pandemic is because we are so privileged to have grown up with vaccines that have eliminated so many scary diseases.
Right.
And so we're like, oh, well, like things aren't that scary.
Right. Yeah. Like polio. Why should I worry about polio? Why should I worry about pertussis or, tetanus or whatever? And that I say that to people like, yeah, I mean, maybe it doesn't seem like you should have to worry about these diseases, but I've had patients die from pneumococcal meningitis, right? And that's a vaccine preventable disease. And how would I live with myself as a mom if I didn't vaccinate my child for a vaccine preventable disease and they got that and died or were permanently disabled? Like, I mean, that's the biggest thing for me that I will say to parents, like, look, if you don't believe the science, I can't do anything about that. If you don't trust our relationship enough to just take my word for it, which is fine, right? I understand you can't just trust everything your doctor says all the time, right? Because, you have to make sure they're listening, and it's just, you have to build that trust. So if they don't know me, maybe they wouldn't trust me quite the same until we've built up that trust. But like the science is the science. But if you don't trust that, then just think about like as a parent, you're trying to make the best decision you can all day, every day, right? There's always something happening. Right. And with vaccines, that decision is if your child dies from a disease that you could have prevented, what are you going to do with yourself? Because I couldn't live with myself.
Yeah, I couldn't either.
Yeah.
And I couldn't live with myself if I felt like I created any form of a spread. That's also on my mind because this whole COVID pandemic has really shown me that people don't really care about their communities because they're like, so what if so what? Okay. Are you healthy? I'm like, well, I'm technically healthy, but
at this point,
I'm overweight. Like, I don't think that people realize when they say like healthy, they mean like you need to be freaking healthy. Do you have a parent with high blood pressure? Is anybody that you love overweight? Do they have diabetes? Do they have anything like these small things? Right. Asthma, my mom, my brother, and my two boys, all four have asthma. Right there, that knocks them out of the healthy category. Right. Whereas I think people are thinking of like decrepit old people, which I mean, their lives matter too.
Well, right. But that's the thing is like with coronavirus, healthy 30 and 4-year-olds have strokes like out of the blue, right? Because it just does all these weird things to our body. And that's the point for me too. It's like, I haven't seen my family and hardly any friends and my kids are doing online school. It's hard. And I think for everybody, it's getting harder and harder the longer it goes on. And they're just getting stir crazy. And then they're starting to take risks. There are some people that just never really paid attention. But there are some people that did. And now they're just like, can't take it anymore. Right. And we just have to find the balance in society and politics to encourage people to do what they need for their mental and physical health, but be mindful of the fact that this virus is very dangerous to people of all ages. And again, like if you gave it to someone in your family and they died, what on earth? Like that would be so disturbing,
Right. Yeah. Actually, my grandfather passed away from COVID. I mean,
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, he was 97. So, I mean, he was
Wow.
very, old. But I've had people say that, like, oh, well, yeah, it's because he was old. And it's like, well, it doesn't make it any less sad. I mean, this man has survived so much in his life.
He could have lived to be 100, right? 3 more years is a big deal.
Yes.
Yeah.
I fully believed he was going to live to make it to be 100. Like, he was in perfect health as far as, I mean, anytime you go to the doctor, they're like, he's old, he had like cataracts and stuff. But other than that, like, he's in great health for his
would have lived. He would have lived a few more years at least. And then, I know that scares me. My grandmother is 94. And at the very beginning, I was like, don't leave your house. Don't let anybody in your house. And if they come in your house, they need to wear a mask. If they have any symptoms, they need to get out immediately. Right. And she's like, yeah, I don't want to get this. And then, I don't know, someone came to visit her and she's like, what are you trying to do? Make me die? She says, I'm just going to tell them you said that. I know. I just tell her, it's okay. You just blame it on me. You tell them, get out because Tanya says that you can't be here. And then they could just be mad at me. I don't care.
That's so funny. So, speaking of masks, there's such I want to say inconsistency, but I don't feel like there has been an inconsistency when it comes to like the scientific world. It's just people out there deciding that there's one. So, in the beginning, Dr. Fauci did say there's no need to do masks. There's no proof that it works. Mm-hmm. And we want to save them for healthcare providers.
Right.
That made sense to me. Right. Then evidence came out and they said, hey, we've done studies and we've shown that even cloth masks, cloth coverings, whatever you can cover your face with is going to reduce the risk of transmission.
Right.
And people took that as, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Mm-hmm. Whereas, and I told my cousin this, I was like, listen, I did not do well in science class, okay? I don't think it takes a brain that is excelling in science to understand that in science things change as information becomes available. Right. What would you tell maybe like a parent who has concerns like, oh, it's making my child breathe in their CO2, or what else do people say? It's causing impetigo.
Yeah. Really, it goes back to like, if we can prevent something for our children, we do our best to prevent it. Right. Mm-hmm. So we prevent SIDS by having infants sleep on their backs. We prevent ejections and traumatic brain injuries and death from car accidents by having children in their car seats until they're 8. Right. Like, that's a long time, not just a year or two, like 8 years of their lives or more in a car seat. We all wear seat belts, right? We tell our children not to smoke. We tell our children not to vape, avoid drugs, avoid alcohol, avoid stuff, right? Like, we do our best to keep our kids safe. To teach them how to swim, keep them away from the pool, put up a pool fence. Like, there's so many things we do. Put a mask on them. Like, why is that a question? Mm-hmm. And, well, he's a kid and kids don't get that sick. Okay. If your child gets it and dies, how is that going to go? Right. Or your child gets it and then gives it to grandma or grandpa and they die and they remember that for the rest of their lives. That isn't going to go well. And it isn't dangerous. There's no evidence that it's dangerous. Yeah, it's a little uncomfortable, but you have to get used to it. We have to do things we don't like sometimes. Sometimes we have to go to school. Sometimes we have to go to work. So, there are some days we just don't feel like doing the things that we have to do, but we have to, because that's the society we live in and that's the life we choose to lead.
Right. And I actually mentioned that to a friend. I told her, she was talking about struggles her child was having with online school, and she misses her friends, and kids need to get back in school for their mental health. And I was like, but they also need to learn to adjust. Right. This should be a temporary situation once we get a vaccine and everything in order. But our kids need to know that there's going to be challenges in life, and just because you don't like something, you don't just throw it out the window. Right. If somebody says this is what's good for your health and the health of others, like, that should resonate with you and be like, oh, I should do that. But I feel like people are teaching children that, like, no, you should be like, I don't like that, so I'm not going to do it. Right. And they're talking in front of their kids like, oh, this is damaging to them. Well, yeah, you're telling them that it's damaging to them, so of course they think that way. I was watching in my break room one day for lunch. I was watching this documentary on crocodiles. I swear this is related. And it was in Brazil, and they had a crocodile that went like rogue and started hunting humans.
Oh.
Well, these two young girls, I think they were like 7 or something, to get to school every day, they had to cross this swamp in a boat. I mean, it's Brazil, so it was like a hollowed out tree trunk. Wow. And there was a man who was kind of like their version of like a crosswalk aide, you know, and he was with them. Well, the crocodile took the boat down. It got the girl in the front. It decapitated her.
Oh my God.
And then they found her body days later.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm watching this, and it's in the midst of all this, you know, our kids are being damaged by not being able to go on school, and they're frustrated with online school. And I'm like, here we are in the United States where our school systems are handing out free laptops so that our children can continue to get a free education. These little girls are crossing a dangerous swamp where one gets decapitated by, and that's just normal life there. That's not because any event's happening. This is a temporary situation. And I just thought, like, man, Americans are jerks.
I feel like that is where society has gotten to at this point, like very entitled, right? There tend to be people who feel like I can do what I want because I've earned my position where I am and I don't have to think about anybody else. But that isn't the way I see the world, right? Like I want to be happy and I want my children to be happy, but I also want to be a good person, and I'm raising my children to be good people and to think about how their actions influence other people and the world, you know, the climate, the economy, like everything. Like you just really have to think about, I am not just one person. I am part of a whole. And if I want the whole to do well, then I have to do my part. So, but you know, I guess I just tell myself that everybody is different and we all make different decisions and we see life differently, and that's okay. You don't have to be my friend and you don't have to work with me and you don't have to be my patient, right? Like you said, if we don't have the same values and, you know, our personalities don't match, that's okay. We don't have to be in each other's sphere, but I do have to be able to go to the grocery store sometimes, or, you know, go to the bank every once in a while. Like there are things sometimes I just have to do that I can't do from home. And so I would appreciate it if you would just wear your mask and not give me your germs.
Right.
Like,
no, totally. And people act like masking is new. It might be new to us, but like think about like China, you know? And this is another random story. I watched that show 90 Day Fiancé. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
You should watch it, Dr. Horner. It's a little trash.
I cannot do drama TV. I get agitated. I get so irritated.
You would get really irritated with these people. Yeah. But one of them, she met a guy it was called 90 Day Fiancé the other way. So these weren't people coming to America. It's Americans going to foreign countries to be with somebody. And she was in Japan, I believe. And his mom's walking around with a mask, and she's pregnant and has a little girl. And she's like, what is she doing? This is pre-pandemic. And he's like, oh, she has a cold, so she's wearing a mask to protect us. Oh. And I was like, yeah, like they got it.
That's awesome. Yeah.
They have it. Yeah. They've been doing it. They survive. Right. They don't get epentigo. They don't inhale their CO2 and kill themselves. Right. And they've been doing this forever.
Yeah. That's awesome. And you know, so since you say that, like I get a email from the Arizona Department of Health every week. Around this time, it starts to come out saying how many cases of flu, how many cases of RSV in the last week, and the percentage change from the prior year and the percentage change from the ongoing average. And the amount of flu, you know, it's not usually too high lately, you know, this time of year, but it's let me think what the last email, maybe in the like 50 a week or something. It's like 2 in the last week. It's down like 83% from last year and about 75% from the ongoing average. And I'm like, yeah, because people are wearing masks and people are not going to school and work so much and they're isolating. Like, it totally works. Like, that's proof that it works.
Right. Yeah. There's so much proof that it works that people just want to ignore it. And the statement that really just grinds my gears is, you know, I have my freedom. I'm an American. And like you were saying, we are required to keep our kids in car seats.
Yeah.
We're required to wear seatbelts. We could get ticketed for these things, right?
Yep. Yep.
There has to be laws or we just live in anarchy, which who wants that? Not me. And then I've also heard people say, well, people aren't doing it right. You know, they're touching their face, they're touching their mask, they're wearing dirty masks every day. But then that brings me back to car seats. You know how many poorly installed car seats I see with kids straps that are like this? And it's like they're not doing it right, but that doesn't mean car seats don't work.
Right.
Just because someone's not wearing a mask properly does not mean masks don't work.
Right. And it's probably still better than nothing, right? Like, even when I see people with it down, I'm like, well, you know, if they sneeze or they cough, they're not going to spew as many particles, right? Yeah. So whatever, at least they're sort of trying, you know, like, it's still better than nothing. And if the majority of people do it and the majority of those people do it correctly, it's going to help.
Yeah. So when the vaccine hits, are you gonna, your family's gonna get it?
We will get the vaccine. We will get a vaccine that is FDA approved and, you know, has been through the rigorous testing and proven to be safe. And, you know, so there's a lot of the political back and forth. And sometimes it's hard for me to, you know, I'm like, okay, I just want to be able to say when the vaccine comes out, I'm going to get the vaccine. Okay. But if the president uses his powers to push through a vaccine that hasn't been fully tested, I will not get that vaccine. Right? Like, it just, there's a reason that we do testing. And
how will the general public know if that's the case?
I imagine it will be all over the news. I imagine if it gets pushed through, then Trump is going to tout it and it's going to be a big deal. And then it's going to be all over the news, you know, and depending on which news station you watch. But I typically watch, mostly I watch CNN, sometimes MSNBC, because I know even though maybe they're more kind of liberal leaning, they're telling me the truth. NPR, I also really like for the truth, right? So I just want the facts. I don't really care your opinion. I just want to know, was it tested through the appropriate, you know, line of testing? And if so, then I'll get it. I mean, all vaccines have some risk. That's just the way it is. But getting the infection has a significantly greater risk.
I don't know if this is true, but because of the anti-vax movement, I heard that they're expecting a possible measles outbreak. So we're going to have flu season with COVID and a possible measles outbreak.
Right. I mean, we've already had measles outbreaks even before this, right? Okay. And because people weren't vaccinating as often, and especially with the MMR, right? And so then we did start to have measles outbreaks, you know, years ago, the one in Disneyland and significant amount of measles in other countries. And so already the recommendation is if people are traveling internationally, which they're not doing right now, but typically we'll even vaccinate infants younger than 12 months if they're traveling internationally. So already we're dealing with that. I think I even saw a headline about polio. You know, maybe we're going to start to see some polio because of people not vaccinating, which is just so scary because it had been completely eradicated. You know, it's eradicated here, but like this shouldn't happen, right?
No, it's frustrating. I would imagine being part of the medical community, it's probably pretty frustrating for you guys. And like you mentioned earlier, you trust me to treat your child, like trust this recommendation. And that really resonates with me because I think that. I'm like, so why do you seek treatment at all that's run by the same scientific community that creates these vaccines and approves these vaccines? Why do you take any of the medications they give you? Why do you even bother going and seeing a doctor
Right.
at that point?
Right.
Because
Right.
you don't believe in it. You don't believe the people that are there to help you. And then during the pandemic, all these people saying that the numbers are fake because hospitals get money. I'm like, you are saying that every person involved
Yeah.
is a liar. The doctors, the nurses, the phlebotomist, the lab that runs it and sends out results. You are saying that all these people that have devoted their life to healthcare are liars.
Right.
And it's ugly.
It's a hard thought to think. I try not to think that. I try to tell myself it's because we all have anxiety about the pandemic.
Sure.
And as parents, we have anxiety about our children. And sometimes just in general, people have anxiety. And so I try to tell myself that they're doing their best to take in all of the information that they get. Unfortunately, a lot of that is not factual, right? So a lot of the social media, and then pretty much you go on the internet and you can find something to support whatever thought you might have in your head.
Yeah.
And so I feel like people just have so much anxiety, so many things to think about nowadays that they get overwhelmed. And then this is their attempt to control the world, even though it's really not a very effective one, right? So like, I'm trying to keep my kid as safe as possible and I'm really scared of vaccines. Well, okay. There are other things that you should be really a lot more scared about, but I think sometimes that's it for people. They feel like that's the only thing they can control. And so they take control over that. And it's not a great choice, really. You know, medically, scientifically, it's not a great choice, but it's their choice to make. So, you know, I just try to continue to have a good relationship and build that trust and give them the education, not make them feel bad, not try to bring them down, try to build them up and just say, like, you know, like we've talked about, hey, you know, what would happen if your child got this disease? Like, this is out there. You need to think about this. So,
are there any like pet peeves that you have, or like recommendations to parents to be like more helpful? Like, for example, does it bother you when people come in with their Dr. Google recommendations or diagnosis? Like, I've diagnosed my child with this because I Googled it.
Yeah. It doesn't bother me. If we can have a conversation and we can have that back and forth and we can come to an agreement, then it doesn't bother me. Because a lot of people, you know, you're trying to do your best for your child, right? So you're looking online, you're trying to make the right decision. Right now, you don't want to go to the doctor if you don't have to. So you try to figure it out on your own and then you give up and you're like, okay, I have to go to the doctor. If you come in and you tell me the full history, you don't try to hide things from me, you don't pretend like you didn't give antibiotics last night, you know, you just tell me what happened, then we have a discussion and I tell you, look, okay, I understand what you're saying. I understand what you read. Yes, that is true sometimes. What I know is this, and this. And if I see this, it's likely to be this. If we do this, this will happen. If we do this, this will happen. And then I tend to be like, okay, look, here are our options. We could do nothing. Here's what I see happening if we do that. We could do this, or we could do this. And I would recommend this. How do you feel? And then we'll have a discussion. And oftentimes we can come to an agreement. I do sometimes get frustrated when parents come in and I know that there's something going on with their child that I could fix or improve at least, right? And then they just will not listen. And then I do sometimes have the thought, like, why did you come?
Right.
Because I don't understand. We just went through all of this and you don't want anything. So I don't understand. But then I just say, okay, you know, this is your decision. This is my recommendation. And if you're not going to choose to take the antibiotics or get blood work or whatever, then you really need to watch for this because this could happen. And if this happens, go to the emergency room. If this happens, call me. If this happens, come back. You know, and then I just try to just be like, okay, maybe next time they'll come in and they'll see what happened, and then maybe they'll trust me a little bit more because I was honest and I didn't criticize them. I didn't put them down. I didn't make them feel bad. I gave them the right to be the parent because that's their right. And then they can, do with that what they want.
You commonly get parents who are actually angry that you won't give their child antibiotics. Like they have a virus and they're like, no, they need something.
Not commonly.
Oh, good.
It does happen. But typically I'll say, yeah, look, like this is definitely a virus. There's not even any fever. There's no ear infection. There is nothing antibiotics are going to do for you. If anything, they're going to cause vomiting, diarrhea, potentially rash, X, Y, and Z.
I remember those days.
Yep. And typically then I can get them to, kind of be okay with it. So sometimes I get the parents that are mad and I just say, look, I'm not comfortable giving antibiotics. I understand your concern. Here's when I would, if this happened, or this happened. And then they can be upset, but at least they understand,
Circumcision. I circumcised my boys.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that after a lot of thought. A lot of people believe it is only cosmetic. Would you say it's cosmetic?
I don't do it because it's cosmetic. I do it because there are medical indications. So there definitely is evidence that it reduces urinary tract infections in little boys under the age of 1. After that, boys don't tend to get urinary tract infections anyway. It reduces the risk of sexually transmitted diseases because if there's that skin there and it's not taken care of well, it increases the area for things to kind of hang out, increases the risk of penile cancer long term because recurrent infections or recurrent irritation can cause cancer. Then if you don't have a foreskin, you can't get phimosis, which is where the skin is too tight and won't pull back. And so I have had patients that have to get circumcised like 8 years old or whatever because they're getting infections and it's too tight and it's causing pain. So when parents ask me, what should I do? I tell them that and I say, look, oftentimes if the dad is circumcised, then they'll tend to get the child circumcised so the child is like dad, or vice versa, right? If you don't want to get it done, then you have to be mindful of the fact that there's the increased risk for urinary tract infections. So you're going to have to watch your infant for any signs of that. You'll have to teach him how to take care of the skin at a very young age, and you'll have to take care of the skin until the child is ready to do so himself. And, typically it can be fine. I don't want to get into any like religious or evolution kind of things,
Right.
But I tend to feel like our body is the way it is because that's what works. And so, although, yes, I believe that taking off the foreskin does help, I also believe that it's part of our body. And if we take care of it the way we should, that it's going to work just fine for us. So,
Okay. I like that answer.
I also feel like we all have the right to choose. And so if you don't think that's right for your baby, then don't do it for your baby. And then other people can make their own decisions.
Yes. And in that case, I completely, because it doesn't affect anybody else.
Right.
If you choose to or not to, I won't even know until you tell me, so to me, like stuff like that, I don't care what people do. When it comes to things like masking, I'm like, well, it affects me. So I have an opinion on it.
Agreed. Yeah.
It's pretty traumatic when I got my boys circumcised. Mm-hmm. I was not expecting that. I cried. Their dad cried.
Yeah.
The way it looks right after is
not pretty.
Traumatizing. No.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was like, what did we do to them? And then it was 2 at a time, that was extra challenging.
Yeah. It is sometimes amusing what I see in the circumcision room. Like parents, dads singing to their babies, dads singing the ABCs or lullabies. I love it. Or dad's freaking out, mom's crying. And, it's like, it's emotional, right? Things when something happens to your child that makes them uncomfortable, it makes you sad. And that's okay.
A lot happens in that first year. That's really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I wasn't ready for that, even though I did work in pediatrics and I knew like the immunization schedules and stuff, but still, like that's why I didn't get Jasmine's ears pierced when she was a baby, because I'm taking her to the doctor to get poked constantly and I'm like, I'm not going to do this again. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today. This was
It was
fun.
fun. It was fun.
Yeah. It's been a long time since I've seen you.
I know. I miss all of my patients. I can't wait to get started again.
You too. Have a good rest of your day.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.